The next person that I think is very, very interesting is Hua Tuo. And Hua Tuo is somebody that lived around 110 to 200 CE, Common Era. Okay, and Hua Tuo, actually, one step ahead of myself. Hua Tuo was born into a very, very poor family. Okay, and in fact, his father passed away when Hua Tuo was only 7 years old. And what happened was when his father passed away, his father was the only source of income for the entire family. So what happened is when his father passed away, Hua Tuo in fact has to go out and get a job to help to support his family. And it's interesting because Hua Tuo at this time was only 7 years old. Okay, so Hua Tuo's very first job was to work in a local pharmacy and local clinic. Okay, his job is basically to do whatever miscellaneous work there was. But what happened to him was he was very observant and he was very studious. So in addition to doing his own job, he paid a lot of attention to what the doctor was doing and how he was treating the patient. And he paid a lot of attention to how the herbs are gathered, how they are prepared, and how they are dispensed to the patient. So basically, this is how Hua Tuo's career was originally established. And later on, when he grows older, he obviously started to practice on his own. And he is always known as the physician of the people. And the reason is because he always was very interested and open to treat all the people around him, regardless of whether they have money or don't have any money, and regardless of whether they are royalty or peasants. Okay, and one thing that always puzzled Hua Tuo was he was already treating more patients than he can possibly see. There are always people that are lining outside his door and that are waiting to be seen. And you always wonder, I just saw you a couple weeks ago, why are you back? Or I successfully treated your condition, and why are you sick again? Okay, so he's wondering why the people do not get better. And the conclusion he came to was that people do not exercise enough. A lot of time they are doing manual labor or they are sitting around not doing anything, and as a result, the qi and blood become stagnant, and that's why they're always getting sick. Boy, does that sound familiar, right? So what happened was one of his first contributions was to realize the importance of exercise, and in fact, he created a specific exercise called Wu Qin Xi, which is the 5 animal frolics, to engage and encourage the patient to exercise as much as possible. And the exercise here is to imitate the physical movement of 5 different types of animals, including the bear, the tiger, the monkey, the crane, and so on and so forth. And basically through exercise, okay, they will remain healthier. And when they remain healthier, they will live longer and have much better health. Okay, so that was one of his first contributions to realize and promoted exercise. All right, but what really brought Hua Tuo to fame was he was credited as the first person to invent anesthesia and the first person to perform surgery. And in fact, he is about 1,600 years ahead of Western medicine as the first person to perform surgery. All right. So his philosophy is that if a person has a mild to moderate illness, then you can easily treat it with acupuncture and treat it with herbs. But if the person has a very severe illness that's affecting the inside of the body, then the only cure is really to do surgery and physically remove the cause. Okay. So first he needed to experiment. And he experimented with many different herbs and eventually came up with a formula that worked very well as an anesthetic. Okay, so he would give this to the person first. You would numb all the pain, but at the same time, the patient is still conscious. So while he is doing surgery, he can still talk to the patient. So this is a historical drawing of Hua Tuo performing abdominal surgery. And this is a picture of Hua Tuo performing external surgery on the extremities. Okay, another thing that's interesting about the background of when Hua Tuo lived and the political situation is he lived and practiced medicine from the transition of the Han Dynasty to the period known as the Three Kingdoms. And what happened with the Three Kingdoms is China was divided into 3 main kingdoms, and they are always fighting with each other. It's basically civil war that lasted for about 60 years. And what happened is they're always fighting with each other. So what happened is there's a lot of war, there's a lot of famine, there's a lot of malnutrition, there's a lot of infection from all the battles and so on. And during this time, Hua Tuo was seeing all these patients, and he in fact had 2 very famous patients. One of the more famous patients is Guan Yu, and this is one of the most famous general in the history of the entire Chinese. And what happened is he's the general for one of the kingdoms. And this general, obviously, when he's wounded in battles, he would call on Hua Tuo to treat his wounds. So here is a picture of Hua Tuo treating his wounds. And Guan Yu is supposed to be so fearless that even though he's getting the surgery, he's still experiencing no pain and is able to play chess without any problem. Okay, but I think the reality may be that Hua Tuo has already, give him the anesthetic herbal formula. Perhaps that's why he's not feeling any pain. In any case, this is one of his famous patients. And the other one of his famous patients is another person from an opposing kingdom. And this is the person called Cao Cao. And Cao Cao is known in history as a very irrational tyrant. Okay, so he's very intelligent, but at the same time is ruthless, and he will kill anybody that stands in his way. And one of the health problems that Cao Cao had was he had a condition called the head wind. And when it comes on, it will be very intense, and it will be very painful to a point where he's not able to do anything. We know this is probably migraine headache today, but in the past they call it head wind. Okay, in any case, within his cabinet, within his kingdom, he could find no physician to treat his headache. So finally, he called on Hua Tuo to come and treat his headache. And Hua Tuo, with insertion of just one needle, was able to treat the headache. Now, what happened is Cao Cao is very, very impressed. So he told Hua Tuo that I want you to stay in my palace and be my personal physician. Okay, I don't want you to go anywhere else. I just want you to stay here and treat me. And what happened was Hua Tuo obviously did not want to do that because he much rather treat everybody else instead of just one person. But he had no choice because that's what the tyrant, the king said. So he stayed in the palace for a while, and eventually he got sick and tired of it. So what he told Cao Cao was, I need to go home and care for my wife because my wife is old and she's very sick. And Cao Cao was suspicious, but he decided to let Hua Tuo go home. And when Hua Tuo left the palace, what Cao Cao also did was he sent a Secret Service agent to follow Hua Tuo to see whether Hua Tuo was telling the truth or not. And he said basically if Hua Tuo was telling the truth, just let him care for his wife, that's perfectly fine. But if Hua Tuo was lying, to bring him back at once. Okay, and as it turned out, obviously Hua Tuo was saying that as an excuse so he can leave the imperial palace. So when that happens, the Secret Service arrested Hua Tuo, brought him back to the imperial palace. And once again, Cao Cao wants Hua Tuo to be his own personal physician. So at this point, what Hua Tuo told Cao Cao was, your headache is so severe that even though I can cure the pain with acupuncture and herb, it's always going to come back. So the only cure to your headache is if I were to give you herbal formula to induce anesthesia, then after that, cut open your head, perform surgery, and remove the cause. That's the only way to permanently treat it. Okay, so by this time, what happened was Cao Cao was very, very suspicious, right? Number one, Hua Tuo has already lied to him. Number two, Hua Tuo is also the physician for the general in the opposing kingdom. So Cao Cao was thinking, maybe you are just making up this as an excuse in order to assassinate me. Okay, so then what he did was he sentenced Hua Tuo to the prison, and basically he's going to have him executed. So while Hua Tuo was in the prison, he knew he was going to die. So he started to write down all his lifelong experience. So this can be passed on. After he finished writing, he passed the manuscripts to the prison guard, and he told the prison guard, this is very, very important. Put it in safe place, keep it in good, a safe place, because it's going to save life. But what happened was the prison guard was scared to death. Cao Cao was a tyrant that if you do anything against him, you're going to get killed. So the prison guard would not dare to accept the manuscripts and just return everything back to Hua Tuo. So Hua Tuo, in extreme frustration and anger, burned the manuscripts. Then he was executed. So unfortunately, all the knowledge that he had, basically none of it was passed on. Okay. Well, in fact, there was one thing that was passed on. And the only one thing that was passed on was the technique for doing castration. Okay. So so the history of China was, at any time in the imperial palace, if you are to have any male servants, they have to all be castrated because they don't want these servants to have sex with the royal family and pass on the impure genes. So that particular surgical technique was well preserved. Basically nothing else. And what we know today about Hua Tuo is the Hua Tuo brand of needles that was exploited for commercial purposes. And then for better or worse, a lot of comic books and also DVDs on the history of Cao Cao and Hua Tuo. Okay, so it's quite unfortunate, but Hua Tuo has quite a legacy in TCM, and it has bits and pieces of missing information that was passed on, but unfortunately nothing complete, nothing from the beginning to the end.